So hi everyone, it's really lovely to see you again. So this is our next video. We're looking at lesson 2 and lovely to be here again with Richard. So nice to see you.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for having me again.
And I hear that you have literally just delivered lesson 2 to your students today.
Yes, I did. I taught it period 1, and they're quite a lively group. And I guess that was partly connected with what I did this year that I haven't done before, is make a slightly more thorough worksheet out of the David Attenborough clip. I still make the David Attenborough clip front and center of this piece. I think David Attenborough is wonderful. Most kids have heard of him. If they haven't, what a great introduction to our national treasure. And it's quite a powerful clip, I think, in lots of different ways. So the worksheet, I'll just share with you the worksheet I've made just to give you a sense of it. It's quite wordy, but in actual fact, that works. That I quite like the fact that it's wordy for reasons that I will come back to. But then crucially at the end of it, what I do is when they're doing the practice, can you see this okay, Faye?
Yeah.
When I'm doing the practice, it's giving them, there are various questions. Describe what you noticed. If you're aware of sensations, where do you feel them most vividly, etc. How do you feel? But this actually is what I would call the gross negative check, because I can literally wander around the classroom after the FOFBOK and see whether anyone is ticking that. And it's quite a nice, easily accessible trauma sensitivity check. And just to return to why I think a worksheet can be quite good is if they come in and they're really buzzy and they're really busy and they're quite hyped, but actually getting them to sit down and read something, that in itself, even if they don't understand what they're reading, it at least brings the class down onto one thing and gives a little bit more structure to the lesson.
Yeah, and I've always, if I've got students in my groups who might struggle, say they're dyslexic or, there's issues around literacy for them, just kind of read through it for them, giving them the opportunity to hear it, even if they can't access it through reading it. Yeah.
And then so they do the questionnaire, they watch the clip, they do the questionnaire, and then I just make sure that they have a good understanding of this slide, which I still think is a really lovely slide because it really, it really embodies the values that we're trying to promote. The other thing I do, which I find quite helpful, is after this, I show them this little clip. And what I do is I turn the sound off. Much as I think Neve's voice is very beautiful, it's quite nice just to turn it off and ask them, what do you think's happening here? They get quite quickly that this is the attention is on the body, on the feet, on the floor, on feet on floor, bum on chair. But then they also get, this helps to reinforce that idea, just this simple little clip of what to do when the mind wanders.
Yeah. It's such a lovely little video for sort of explaining that, because it also normalizes the fact that, of course, it wanders, and there's nothing wrong there, if that's what's happening.
And I think actually the other thing to mention with that clip is that's also quite a good segue into home practice. And I think our attitude to home practice has probably changed. I don't know whether you find this over the last 10 years. I think when we first sort of did .B, it was more because it had come off the back of MBCT and MBSR and the importance of home practice. We had always wanted to try and reinforce home practice. And whilst I think, you can't learn if you don't practice, I feel increasingly reluctant to be pushing practice on the kids and overly evangelizing and being overly enthusiastic about it. And I think I've come to a position which is more like, I'm going to send you this link. I'll say, it's a great animation. I said, have a go if you want, but, it's optional. And I really leave it at that. I don't know about how that compares with your approach, Faye.
Yeah, totally. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because it's the same when you're working with adults as well. It's just having this middle line that you walk between sort of encouraging and saying, the benefits are potentially going to be stronger if you practice more. And at the same time saying, and life is life. And sometimes it's tricky to find the time for these things, but even just having a little go, what we say in that very first lesson is have a go is just such a lovely invitational way, isn't it? So it doesn't feel like it's something I've got to do, like another chore in life.
Yeah. I think other than that, this one I kind of stick to the flow of the lesson, but there's a lot of content in the lesson. And actually, I suppose probably the difference is I've shifted it a bit to have a slightly longer build up to the Attenborough clip and a discussion of it, then the clip, then the practice, then the feedback on the practice. So I guess it's a little less. So I've shortened it a bit, but I still find it works well. Foffbox still feels like the right name. Still feels like still seems to work as a practice.
Yeah, the only time where I've changed things with this lesson is that very occasionally with a group, I feel like referencing animals and the mind, sometimes it hasn't always landed with the children that I've worked with. And so I've then moved more into something that I do in Paulsby when I deliver Paulsby, which is more about mood recognition in the mind and body. So a little bit of early into my mind feels, my body feels, which is later on in the program. Just to kind of like get them connecting with this idea of observing what's happening, which is of course what we're trying to encourage them to do. And that's just if for any reason I feel like it's not sort of making sense for them around comparing their mind to animals. I can count on one hand how many times that's happened, but it's just a nice alternative.
Yeah, it's an alternative.
I'm only going to ask you this because we had a conversation about it just before, but you were sharing with me that you're taking your group out on a mindfulness field trip.
Yes, that's right. So I have a group of older kids these are the opt-in kids. So they tend to be, actually these ones I've got a few year 11 and I've got mostly year 13. It's about 18 kids in total. And it's a field day, which means that everybody's going off and doing their various activities. And so for mindfulness, what we do is it's quite easy from where we are. We're not far from the train station, which goes straight into Charing Cross. And what we do is we get to Charing Cross. This might sound a bit out there, but it's really lovely because we get off the train, we gather in the kind of concourse at the train station, and St. Martin in the Fields, the church, is not far away. Sorry, I should just rewind. Before that, I showed them a clip from Peaceful Warrior where the kind of guru character grabs hold of his protege, who's a gymnast, having thrown him in the pond, and says, "Look around you, there's so much happening here." And the protege, who's a gymnast, says, "There's nothing happening here." And the character, Nick, grabs him, turns him around, looks at the park, and there's a ladybird crawling up a leaf, there's somebody reading, there's somebody throwing a frisbee, there's a couple kissing. And he says to him, "There's never nothing happening." And so based on that, and that's what I show them in my classroom before we go. We walk to the train station, we get on the train, we go to Charing Cross, and then they walk from Charing Cross to St. Martin Fields on their own, just completely quietly. Well, I mean, obviously with a teacher at the front, teacher at the back, have done all the trip forms, etc., etc. But then I asked them just to look, just to notice. And it's incredible what that tiny slice of London presents to them. But then we walk into St. Martin in the Fields and they just sit in a pew. I say, find a pew on your own and we're going to be here for 15 minutes or so. And they'll just sit there quietly on their own. And that's a wonderful space. You never know what's going to be happening. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes there's a music rehearsal. Sometimes it's busy. Sometimes it's empty. And then I guess we do a few other things in London. And then I guess the ending, which is quite dramatic, is that I asked them to sit on the base of Nelson's column, which again might sound a bit out there. I'm not asking them to sit cross-legged, in some Zen posture, but I asked them all just to sit there. It makes a great photo of the trip for them, but also just to look, because normally we look at Trafalgar Square, at Nelson's column, but if you're sitting on Nelson's column and looking at Trafalgar Square and over towards the National Gallery or down past Whitehall and everything, and you can see Big Ben, it's just, it's majestic, it's wonderful. And even though they only sit there for 10 minutes, I hope that what I'm doing there is creating quite a memory of, beginner's mind, effectively, is what we're trying to teach on that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Out of curiosity, how old are they?
So this tomorrow, it's going to be 3 of them a year 11. So that's, what is that, 15, 16 GCSE year. And 15 of them are going to be 17 or 18. So quite a mixed age group. It's bizarre. For some reason this year, normally it's kind of lower sixth and upper sixth, year 12, year 13. This year, for some reason, I've got a really good little cluster of year 11 GCSE boys, but then it's kids, because it's a boys' school. But then I've got some of the older kids, but no year 12 for some reason. Why? I don't know. No idea.
It does just sometimes skip a year, doesn't it, in terms of their interests and wanting to do things. I think
Yeah,
that's just normal, isn't it? Sometimes it's who's interested, and that can bring a whole group of people along. I know
yeah,
you've got a really wonderful student who has left now, but was a real kind of force for change and for
yeah,
developing things.
yeah.
Your
Ethan,
school.
he's one of our ambassadors actually, and he was just an incredible kid. And I do think, I guess my advice out there to anybody who's watching this as a teacher is if you can find those champions in the school who can really persuade other kids that this is a great thing to be trying, then that really is so valuable. But you know, it's interesting because just another quick one. I had an email from a kid who left last year, someone who very quiet, would never have been one of the ones who was advocating this to other people. But he's really interested in doing a meditation retreat he's taking a year out before going to uni, and he's going to be doing some work here and some travel there. And he wanted to know where he could do a meditation retreat. And we talked about retreats and the pros and the cons. But that was really lovely because, again, he's not the advocate, but it's really made a difference to his life. You can tell. And there are various other things connected with this particular kid which I know it has helped with.
Mm.
So yeah, we're
Yeah.
sowing seeds, aren't we? I mean, that's what we're
Yeah.
trying.
And as I've had, I'm sure you've had, sometimes a long time into the future, you hear back from students that you've taught. And I had one student, and she found mindfulness practice that she'd learned through .B really supported her, and has now gone on and done a psychology degree with a really large chunk of mindfulness as part of it.
Wow.
Yeah, this is, it can be,
Yeah.
used so many different ways, and we never know when we're actually delivering it how it's
No,
going to be
no,
used
that's
by the
no,
students.
that's right. And you can't tell just by looking at them who's
No.
that I've had this before, somebody asking about meditation retreats. And I not only had I taught him, but I'd been his tutor. I was, quite close to him as a pupil, but actually I had no idea that mindfulness had made any difference. And it was probably 4 or 5 years after he'd left, he got back in touch and said he had clearly really remembered to bring it back to what we're talking about, FOFBOC. That's where it kind of began.
And we said this right at the beginning of this series of videos. This is why this is education. We're teaching young people about what mindfulness is. We're giving them a little taste of the practice. What happens then for them in terms of how mindfulness supports them? We just don't know. And lots of people then let us know how it's come back to them in later life in different ways. So
Yeah,
really, really nice to hear that about your student wanting to know about meditation retreats. How lovely.
great.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well, I'll see you next week.
Yep, see you next week.